Future opportunities in the Arctic will be found in the development of sustainable farming and food security. I believe that learning traditional ecological knowledges from indigenous communities is essential.
And showcasing all of the extremely nice produce that we have in Northern Norway.
The youth are the present and the future. We need to make it more attractive for young people to choose to live in the Arctic. We must dare to bet on the youth, because without the youth, there is no future.
I envision the Arctic to be a future green energy hub and competence area that can attract youth from all over the world. One of the most interesting places to live and work in, both now and in the future.
Technical hiccups.
Hello everybody and welcome to our second big picture session where we're really focusing on food on the move. Now shortly we're going to be joined by a panel of experts and thought leaders who are really going to discuss this wide-reaching topic, looking at how climate change has had a huge impact already on our oceans, causing many marine species to migrate, adapt, or even disappear. And we'll be finding out how local communities, indigenous peoples, businesses, and governments have got to keep constantly adapting to try and keep up with the changes. And Andreas, you're going to be taking this on you in Break TV as well.
I will adapt in Break TV. And look at the people, they all adapt despite all the receptions we had last night. So I guess we had some latecomers coming in. But happy that you're back and welcome back to the second day of our big pictures, the third day of Arctic Frontiers already. And as you said, I will discuss the complexity of food production, Arctic livelihoods, and environmental concerns also in the Break TV after the first big picture.
And you have to be on your feet. You have to migrate quickly, don't you, after the break out there?
Move north, I guess. So
okay.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. So I think the background for our discussions today are the 3 F's in crisis: food, fuel, and fertilizers. Now, as many of you well know, the war in Ukraine set off a food security crisis. Prices escalated, fertilizers were in very short supply, and there were really big disruptions in supply chains, which have exacerbated the cost of living crisis in so many countries. However, this could present some opportunities for the Arctic region, given that it is a region so rich in proteins and traditional food production. The challenge is, how will the Arctic come in to try and help solve some of the problems that we're facing right now, particularly the food challenge in particular. Different parts of the Arctic really do seem to be on different trajectories. So how can we speed up some regions, some industries, and how do we meet growing demands of people right across the region? And how can we deal with declining ocean health? So many topics to get stuck into. And I'm now very pleased to welcome our panel for the first session of welcome to the stage, first of all, Minister for Fisheries and Ocean Policy of Norway, Bjørnar Skjæran. Welcome. Please do take a seat. Thank you. I'm sitting in the middle. Right. Also, Vicky Lee Wahlgren, who is the director of the World Wildlife Foundation Arctic Programme. Welcome, Vicky. Come onto the stage. I'll join you up here. Also, please, can we welcome Aya Schmitz Larsen from Greenland, Member of Parliament from the Kingdom of Denmark. Taylor Holzhauser, who is an investment associate at Builders Vision and a senior advisor and former managing director of the Alaska Ocean Cluster. Welcome. Anders Vagn-Nielsen, who's a business developer from Resourcer, and he'll tell us much more about Resourcer and what it does in just a moment. Also, Nolan Kamanir, who's a young Inuit from Arctic Policy Hackathon, which was a real brainstorming event. And just to remind you as well, we want lots of brainstorming in the room. Welcome, Nolan. We want lots of brainstorming in the room, so please do send your questions over to me, and I'll get them on the iPad, and I can put them to the panel probably nearer the end of the session. But first of all, let me speak to you, Minister, because obviously geopolitics is still looming very large over this whole event. And while cooperation with Russia is in the deep freeze across so many areas, there is still cooperation between Norway and Russia in terms of fisheries and the ocean. Why is that? Why is it impossible for there not to be cooperation, in your view?
First, if I can start to say Norway, as the other countries, we condemn what Russia is doing in Ukraine. It's terrible, and together with our neighbors and with the EU, we put the strongest sanctions against one country ever in history to tell Russia what we think about this, and to make them not be able to stay in the war for a long time. That's the one thing. The other thing is that and we have put our cooperation with Russia in the same freezer, but we do not choose our geography. And the best managed cod stock in the world lives in the Barents Sea, which we share with Russia, even we like it or not. And if we should have sustainable management of this stock and the other species in the Barents Sea, we have to do it together with the other owner. So that's why we do this, not on a political level, but the Commission has fulfilled their mission. We have also a treaty, an agreement for the quotas for 2023, and that means a lot to the Norwegian fishermen who can go out in the Barents Sea in the Nordic areas and do their job. It means a lot to the Spanish fishermen, to the British fishermen, and to the EU fishermen that we have low tension and rules for the fisheries in the northern areas.
Would you compare it to the Black Sea situation?
Yeah, EU haven't, and we haven't put sanctions to food. And we can look at the TV, and we can see how the world are working to get the ships out of the Black Sea with food to the people in the world. It's the same that happens in the Barents Sea. It's food. It's not. Yes, it costs money, but it's not money. It's food to the people all over the world.
Okay, just moving on now to, obviously there is the geopolitical threat as well that you have to try and navigate, but then of course we have the climate threat as well. Jeanette Larsen, can you just explain to me a little bit just about how adaptable you've already had to be in terms of climate? What are you doing, what have you had to do to really survive?
I think it's important to say that the temperature in the Arctic is rising 4 times as much compared to the rest of the world. So it's really changing the climate in the Arctic. And I think so many people living in the Arctic, they're so used to adapting to the climate. This is not new. So we don't necessarily, for example, in Greenland, have a lot of demonstrations on climate change. We need to do something. But politically, we're actually driving this agenda to make sure that there's a green transition, but that we're also focusing on this adaptation to a new reality when it comes to climate. So I think finding a balance between acknowledging indigenous knowledge, because this is very important, and of course academia and for example researchers on fish stocks and what should the quotas be and so on. This is an ongoing political debate in the Greenlandic society. And some places in Greenland we see, because we've been fishing, and to some extent I would say almost overfishing as well, we see that the fishes are becoming smaller and smaller. We also see new species, for example, such as herrings or tuna in Greenland. They're coming, but then they're also going. So we really needing to adapt to a different reality also when it comes to fish. And I would say food security is so important for so many people, and we all need to eat, and we also need to eat in the Arctic as well. And everybody I know back home in Greenland, they go fishing or hunting in the weekend, even though if they're doing something different during the week for a job. So living in nature, of nature, and being aware of sustainability is something that's, it's natural for so many people living in the Arctic. And we're fishery nations as well, a lot of the Arctic states. So natural resources is a gift that we've been given, but I think it's very important to governing fish stocks and so on in a sustainable way.
Absolutely. Let me pick up on that point that you made about leaning on Indigenous knowledge, and let me bring in Nolan Kenrick. What is your real concern for food security? What are the risks?
When I look at food security and think of the risks, I see the pathway to success is self-determination. So food as a pathway to self-determination. By looking at food through this lens, it allows us to uncover the intersectionality and connectedness between culture, language, policy, knowledge sources, and co-management in the way food systems currently do not allow for.
And you say the current food systems do not allow for. How could this be changed? And what is the greatest risk, would you say, for food security?
Sure. The greatest risk, I believe, that food currently has is the warming climate. As I was mentioning just before me, as the Arctic warms at a significantly faster pace than the rest of the world, our need to develop policies that work to empower Indigenous community values and Indigenous ways of knowing increases as well. In this application of these policies, we must not consider Indigenous knowledge just as an appetizer, but as a part of the whole meal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nolan. And let me bring in Vicky now. I could see you nodding to what Nolan was saying. So to what extent do you think that Indigenous knowledge and culture should lead policy much more from the World Wildlife Fund's perspective?
I think Indigenous knowledge is absolutely essential in this overall perspective. I mean, exactly what both Arja and Nolan were saying. When we're talking about food here and food security, the fish are not only a resource for us, right? I mean, they're part of the broader ecosystem, and exactly as you had described it as well. That relationship, that view, that long-term relationship that the Indigenous people have had with these foods, whether they be fish, whether they be the whales and seals that are eating the fish. I mean, all of these ones, it is so essential for that. Western science, I think, is, of course, absolutely essential as well and can tell us some things, but Indigenous knowledge, the relationships that they have with the food is also different, and I think we need to have that complementarity. And
how do you achieve that? I mean, there is this, this idea of inclusiveness, but what does it actually really mean on the ground in practice? What kind of dialogue is absolutely crucial, and what kind of environment should that dialogue take place in?
That's a really big question, and I think it's one that's being worked on. I have to say that for myself personally, I've worked many years outside of the Arctic, in tropical areas, and working together with Indigenous peoples, local communities in many parts in Southeast Asia, Eastern Africa, etc. Coming up here and working in the Arctic, I have been so impressed by the organization and the voice that Indigenous peoples do have here, and so rightfully so, and I think we need to continue building on that. I think that the example that we have with the Indigenous peoples and their roles as permanent participants in the Arctic Council, involved in, for example, the new Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, is absolutely essential to have them in that room. I think they should not only be in that room, they need to be having that permanent spot at the table as well. Their knowledge, their rights need to be strengthened even more than I already see them here, which is what I was saying, stronger here that I see in the north than what I've seen in so many other parts in the world.
Okay, Vicky, thank you. I'm going to get other perspectives from you in just a moment, but I want to put that to the Minister. How do you think Indigenous culture and knowledge should be best integrated into policy. What are you doing in Norway, and do you see areas where it could be improved?
Yeah, I think we always can do better in all areas. And in Norway, we some years ago we established a parliament for the Sami people, and we have consultations. We have structured processes to assure that their people are listened to, and that the rights of the Sami people are taken care of. And we can always be better. It's also to my party, the Labour Party in Norway. We have our own structure for this in the party as well.
And do you think that's what really should happen? It needs to go almost from, party level in a way. Is that the best way to kind of start to scoop up knowledge and integrate it into policy?
I think we have a good structure. So I will start with that. We have a good structure. We can always be better, but it's about that when we discuss the big issues, we also have to have all the parts around the table. I think that's the ground line here.
So talking about knowledge and all the parts around the table, let's move on to kind of science and how science could be used to improve actually funding of some of the more kind of sustainable food production practices. Let me bring in Taylor Holzhauser, who's an investment associate at Builders Vision. And Taylor, you've looked pretty closely at just how the effective transfer of scientific knowledge can actually really be a game changer when it comes to funding, haven't you? Can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, and so when we invest, we're looking really at the long term. And so we're trying to understand what natural variations occur, in the North Pacific, North Atlantic, South Atlantic, et cetera. How do those affect the underlying business? Fisheries, especially wild fisheries, are naturally variable. But as climate is changing, that variability is changing. And we're trying to understand better from the scientists, what data are you using to make these decisions? How do we understand where those changes are going, and how is that going to impact the business? Now, on the finance side, we're very good at modeling. We can take a look at the cash flows. We can say, okay, here is where this business needs investment. We're not scientists by background. Very rarely do we have many scientists who can understand the science that's happening. And so what I think NOAA has done a very good job of, at least in the North Pacific, and to some degree on the Atlantic coast as well, is creating packets of information that help us understand, not in necessarily a popular science way. It's still very rigorous. It's still very much grounded in what the data is and what they know and don't know. But it's helping the investment community just get a better grasp of what are these long-term trends. So when we start to deploy capital, what should we be doing in expectation? And then on the technology side, which is the team I work on, where can we back technology companies to help fill the gaps in the data collection? And so I think NOAA and others have been very helpful in trying to create a private market economy that we can plug and play with. And we can fund things to help fill those gaps that they see.
Have you got any specific examples, for example, of species where this has been particularly effective?
Yeah, so we've been involved in a project, a company that we backed called Blue Ocean Gear makes a smart buoy that attaches to existing buoy structures on a pot or a trap gear. And we're deploying those out in the Bering Sea with crab fishermen. And if you've been following the news lately, Alaska crab stocks are not doing very well. And for the first time in many years, there won't be many fishermen out fishing for king crab, fishing for snow crab, et cetera. Those buoys are helping us collect data on why that might be, because it's a big unknown. And so by funding the technology, making the connections with industry, partnering with industry to deploy those data, and then that data is now being fed back to the NOAA Ice Desk, being fed back to NOAA Fisheries. That's the kind of thing where private capital can enable something like that and kind of see things coming. That's not perfect. There's gaps. There's still a lot more that could be done, but I think it's an exciting area in kind of the impact investing space in particular, where we're translating some of those new technologies coming out of the lab, looking at where NOAA needs partnerships, looking where others need partnerships, and working with industry.
Great. Well, thanks for explaining all of that, those kind of like new initiatives, and that how those packets of scientific knowledge are so vital actually for the capital funding for such projects. How does that tie into what you're doing, Anders Vagn-Nielsen from Resourcer, where you're really trying to look at biocircularity? Do you think, almost if there's greater knowledge of what you're trying to do, there could be greater funding possibilities?
Yes, I think we have to just acknowledge that we are in the midst of a paradigm shift. And this is both the crisis, but it's also the fact that biology is becoming the new technology. So right now, I think the bioeconomy is where the internet was in 1993, and a lot of things will happen. So the whole baseline for this discussion will change in 5 years. We will discuss algae production, low trophical species, a lot of bioprocessing using enzymes and utilizing the resources that today is considered waste or even pollution. So this is a really big systemic shift that is enabled both by the acknowledgement that we live in a biosphere and also by new technologies and new knowledge driven by scientists. But I would also say that this is also the indigenous people know a lot about this. So this is an intersection between the living planet and the technology. This is where the magic is happening right now. So this is what we are working with when we say biocircularity. It's scaling these processes to become industry.
And are you drawing on indigenous knowledge directly to do this? And do you think you could do more of that?
We are just an enabler in this. So Resources is documenting the actual functional and nutritional characteristics of the different fractions that will become like resources in this new economy. So we are really, really early stage. And we are sort of pointing towards a new paradigm. So this makes it actually quite difficult to get the impact capital, because they always want like return on investment within like 3 to 5 years. We think this will happen maybe 5 to 10 years. This will be a really big industry. But I think it represents a huge possibility for the Arctic.
Let me talk about that possibility. What do you make of that? Do you see that as great potential in Greenland for this? As I was mentioning, it's already happening in many ways in very local communities, but scaling it up, is that exciting?
First of all, I just wanted to say that we have a saying at our party, which is nothing about us without us, nothing about Greenland without Greenland. And I think that's so important to put into this discussion as well. We actually got it into the coalition paper for the Danish government, nothing about Greenland without Greenland. And I think this is a new way of representation of indigenous peoples. And I think figuring out a way of how can we use academia and indigenous knowledge. Maybe it's a matter of having more guidelines on how should we actually involve indigenous communities in figuring out new systems, for example. I think another issue is also thinking strategically in an environment which is unpredictable. There's going to be new species, for example, in the oceans around the Arctic seas, and how can we adapt to that strategically already. And I think one of the answers to that is involving indigenous communities, because I think they have the knowledge, and day to day they have knowledge on what's changing and what's different. So I think that's the way I would answer your question.
And just looking at kind of more the wider picture, how concerned are you that species that have had the sustainable label, that label could be ripped off because of some, for example, of overfishing in certain areas? How do you deal with that, and how effectively do you ensure that food is still sustainably sourced but meets growing needs?
I think one trend which is quite interesting when it comes to the consequences of climate change is that we're seeing sustainable fish, and especially from clean Arctic waters, is something that has a high price. So I actually see that sustainability is something that the people want and the consumer wants. So I think there's two different trends going against each other, I would say. There's the economic wish to have more and more money from fishing more and more. And on the other hand, we see that when you fish sustainably, you actually get higher prices. So I think these are two trends that we're seeing, at least in Greenland and maybe also in different Arctic nations. And that's why I think the discussion is difficult, because there's so many interests when we talk about fisheries. There's a lot of money when we talk about fisheries. If you get quotas, for example, in Greenland, you get access to a lot of money. So this is a political debate which is filled with dilemmas, I think, but also something that we need to discuss much more into detail, and figuring out how can we engage with the local community.
And so, when you talk about that detail, do you feel as though, you're not going deep enough, really? In what kind of detail would you like much more focus on?
I can give you one example. In Greenland, we have a commission on fisheries, and they gave the output from their work a couple of years ago. And it's been so difficult to find a compromise because there's so many interests. So right now it's just going on and on and on with the discussion. I don't know if maybe you have the same issues in Norway or other Arctic countries, but it's just, there's so many economic interest in this issue, and therefore it's a little bit of a battle. And I think it would be interesting to see how can we, see it as shared interest when we talk about the natural resources that we have, and how can we do it in a balance of, of course, making money for the economy of the nations, but also making sure that it's, considering the nature and the climate change and so on.
Mm-hmm. So let me bring in you, Vicky. I mean, you've talked a lot about keeping within nature's limits to ensure long-term functioning of systems, but ultimately, how do you measure this, and how do you agree on those limits?
That's a really tough one, and I find that even that idea, nature's limits, it's like there's idea that there's an absolute truth out there, a fixed number of this is what the limits is, this is what we need to stay under to be able to keep it sustainable. But that's not the case, right? Exactly what I was talking about. This whole system is in flux, right? And we were talking before, you were mentioning about how we are in a crisis. I would like to say we're in a triple crisis right now, right? We've been talking these past few days, of course, everybody's talking about the climate crisis, but intimately connected to that, we're in a biodiversity crisis. And intimately connected with both of those two, we have an inequity crisis that we need to deal with, all of these ones together, right? So to be able to measure what's within nature's limits, those limits are in flux, right? The whole systems are in flux. New species are coming, new species are disappearing, the size, everything, the whole oceanography is changing, the systems, the salinity, everything. And science is measuring this fantastically, right, and trying to get an understanding of it, but it's unbelievably complex, right? And we don't know exactly what's going to happen when this species come in and that one's going on. The Arctic ecosystem is so fragile, right? So yes, we always need to try to make those decisions based on best available knowledge, and to me that would be, again, the combination of the academic, the science knowledge, and the traditional knowledge to inform us on those. But I say we need to be pretty cautious in this because of the uncertainty. We need to give nature space because of all of the pressures that it's under. I think we all want to be able to have strong economic development, to be able to have those resources forever.
But when you say give nature space, how does that tally with the needs of growing populations and when there are real food security issues globally?
I would go back to what these guys are talking about. I think that I think there's a lot around how, we keep on thinking we need to take more, I think we can do a lot more with what we've already got, right? And thinking differently, this biocircularity like you're talking about, different types of food. I mean, when we look at fish, if we talk about that, we fish really small number of species, actually, and fish them like crazy. There's lots of other resources that we could do, right? I mean, we could spread that around. We could see how we're using each of those different species, the bits within it to use for this and that. So I would like to challenge this need to always take more and see if we could consider first reducing that amount, thinking about how we could be reusing things, and thinking about how we can do that to meet these challenges.
Minister, let's take on board what Vic is saying, and Aya, the fact that we're in this state of flux. It must be very difficult to set policy when we are in this state of flux? Does the kind of incoming tech revolution in fisheries, do you think that provides hope for you?
Yeah, my opinion is that there is always hope, and we also know what the most important answer is. It's very easy. It's that we have to stop the heating of this planet. So that's the one most important question. If we don't, the oceans will be something else than what we are used to. But to Norway, we have knowledge-based management and experience-based management of the seas, of our ocean and of our resources. To us, that's very important, because if you do that, you don't have the political discussion of what is right and what is wrong. This is knowledge-based. We use a lot of money on the institute, our research institute, and the directory of the fisheries. So we have this knowledge-based management of our stocks. And the other thing, in our view, some 100 years ago, the population on the Earth went over the number where you could live. Everybody could live from hunting. Then agriculture was the answer. We have to farm the. We have to do it with agriculture to rise the production. We know that 70% of the Earth is oceans, and when the population grows so much that we know we will not have food enough to the population, the answer, of course, is in the ocean. And I think that some of the answer is the same. We have to grow the ocean. We have to farm in the ocean, and that's what we have done in Norway, and some other countries have done the same. Fish farming, other aquaculture, seaweed. We have to do this. It's the same answer as many 100 years ago.
Okay, so how do you then take that answer many 100 years ago for the future? Anders, let me bring you in.
I would like to say that it's a good point with the farming. Salmon farming is a beautiful example of the value, economical value, in modern bioeconomy, but it's also a very bad example on the linear economy, where a lot of the feed that is going into the fish farming is coming from the Amazon area with soybeans, soy protein. And we also emit 300,000 tons of sludge along the Norwegian coast every year. And in that sludge, there is more phosphorus and more nitrogen than what is being used in the whole farming industry in Norway, land-based. So if we could both replace the soybeans in the feed and take care of the sludge and extract the nitrogen and the phosphorus to use low-impact fertilizer for the farmers, this would have benefits both in value creation but also in the heating of the planet.
But how do you do that? So what is the mechanism? Do you need to bring in Taylor and his funding solutions to ensure that there are companies who are thinking longer term that will actually enact that?
Yeah, this is a big policy challenge, because we need to design the system. Should it be distributed? Should it be connected to the local communities? We need infrastructure for collection, for pre-processing. We maybe need biogas production nearby where this is landed. This could be a really interesting way of building the new industry for a lot of communities that are today under uncertainty because of the migrations and the changes in the ocean. So but you need political vision, and you need funding of infrastructure, and then you need collaboration with private investors and businesses that could sort of fill the roles in these new emerging business ecosystems. So this is super exciting, but I think we need to sort of, well, we are in a position now where this is not deterministic. We can actually choose to design the society, to design these industrial systems this way, to achieve these targets. And we could measure the amount of sludge going into the fjords and the exported protein from places with big monocultures. This is thing that we could measure. It's good metrics for the development.
Right. I'm going to go back to the Minister in just a moment, but I want to get your view, Taylor, on this, because there is this frustration that the food production industry really moves so slowly, like a huge tanker taking a long time to turn around. How can different funding solutions actually perhaps not change that and actually push that tanker into the right direction? And what is wrong with the way that food industries are currently funded?
I think to some degree it's requires systems thinking on the part of the food manufacturers, food producers, that to some degree, recognizing that, getting to a more kind of ecological whole view, right? And we talked about this, I think, over on fisheries, but on food production as a whole, and that's happening. I think food producers globally are beginning to realize they don't produce just soybeans, they don't produce just wheat, they don't produce just salmon. They produce those in an environment that has quite a few other species, quite a few other impacts beyond just their immediate farming. On the financial side, on the investment side, I think part of it is matching food production with the right investors and the investors who have the right incentives. And so if you are an investor who needs that 3 to 5 year timeline, food production is probably not the best place for you to be allocating capital. These systems, they do take a long time to change. They are very cyclical. They're subject to a lot of variability. That is going to require someone who has a much longer time horizon. And I think there are new capital providers out there, family offices, for example, larger pension funds that are beginning to see you can do long-term impact investing. And this is a category of some controversy in the United States, ESG, impact investing. But I do think as we see more allocators who say we don't need the 3 to 5 year IRR numbers, the internal rate of return numbers that we may see from venture capital, we're happy to deploy capital on a long term if we also have some impact, right? And you can say, okay, not only is this capital making us money back at the end of the day, over the period of time we can actually quantify or we can qualify what's happening as a result of that capital deployment. So to make that real and to kind of provide an example, you could have capital going into a seafood company on the expectation that we're not going to try to push that company to go public in a 3 to 5 year period. We're going to say we're going to buy this for 10 or 15 years, and we're going to structure our fund on the back end using legal mechanisms to ensure we don't have that incentive to push for an exit. Right? And what that results in is a company that is taking a systemic view of the problems, has time to implement, to assess, implement, and say, okay, we know what's working, and then share that out more broadly. If your incentive structure is, I need to make a quarterly report, hit what my investors tell me the rates I need to hit, you don't have time to take the long view. I'm not going to say that food production and food producers don't see that or don't recognize that importance. I think they absolutely do. But on a day-to-day, what's in your email inbox? It's inflation, it's labor supply issues, it's cost increases on gasoline, on all your inputs. That's a much more immediate problem than a climate change that's taking place over a decade or a multi-decadal cycle. And so if you're an investor, if you're pushing your portfolio companies, your holdings, to think in that short term, I don't think you should be investing in the food production system.
Do you think then long-term private investment will help, given the fact that the political cycles are very short often and that government policy can change?
I'm not sure I understood it.
Well, say, for example, governments change regularly, and so their policies can often change with them. Do you think then unlocking private capital to invest in some of these more exciting projects could be a better way forward?
I think when it comes to how the politics, the ocean politics are in Norway, there will be no revolution in the years to come. So I think to investors, this is safe investment.
But should there be, though, more of a revolution, and should perhaps more of what we've been talking about, Anders' concepts, actually be taken on board?
Well, I think that we are on the right track, and the history shows us that. But we have to be more sustainable when it comes to the aquaculture. Of course, we have to be. But I do not agree in the picture that aquaculture in Norway has ruined our fjords. That's not true, because we do investigation every year, and the documents shows us that under this industry, the condition is good. And that's because the main reason is two things. We have the Gulf Stream, and this industry has learned from the history, and today they are located much better than 20, 30 years ago. So I think that this is an industry that can grow in Norway. We can be more sustainable in two ways. One is the circular economy. What is about the sludge, and also about using the whole fish. And the other issue is about how we get the feed resources. And we have programs for this, so I think we will develop these two things in the right direction, and this industry will be much more sustainable in 10 years, in 20 years than today, and it can grow. And one more point.
Quickly.
Yeah. I hear people talking about this is difficult for the wild catch fishery, the traditional fisheries, but the history tells me that a kind of collapse in our biggest fish stocks we had in the 60s, the herring, we had in the 80s, the Arctic cod. That was before this industry has grown. So the situation now is that our biggest stocks, our biggest species, they are in good condition, and we have an industry who has grown side by coexistence. So I'm not sitting here saying there are no problems. Of course there are issues, but the big picture is that you can coexist in our oceans. We have the oil and gas, we have the aquaculture, and we have the fisheries, and we will have more ocean energy. Our goal is that this could coexist, and together.
It's a challenge, and let me bring in you again. You clearly want to come in on the few points that the minister was saying.
Just understand me right. I'm not. What I'm talking about here is mostly the potential, the positive potential in scaling this and going faster than the trajectory of just waiting and seeing what's happening, and when the private funding will start coming into this.
Then I agree.
We need a more ambitious policy in all these areas that you mentioned. Yeah.
Would you agree that we need more ambition? And what's your take on this coexistence that there is between the energy industry and oil and fisheries? Is there really a coexistence? Is that really possible?
I think that we will need to have a certain amount of coexistence of different types of industries in this space, right? I mean, that's obvious. Again, we were talking about the sustainable development and economic development, yes. But there's different types of industries in there as well, right? Some of them that are more dangerous, could be more harmful, other ones that are more renewable, that can be measured more carefully. So I think that definitely that composition of what the industries could or should be, I think we might have slightly different opinions on what those ones might look like, but I would certainly agree that it will be necessary and it should be possible to have that mixture.
Okay, Aya, let me bring you in. I know you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I have two comments. One comment is, I saw in the news here in Norway that the prices are rising in the supermarkets by 10%, I think. I believe it's 20% for meat. So I think this is really, it could be a potential food crisis. And this is something that we're seeing as an effect of the war in Ukraine as well, that prices for all of us are going up. So we need to see, could there be some potential in thinking differently? And that's the way I hear Anders is saying, how can we use the slush, for example? And we have a project in Greenland which is about the same, so I think that could be interesting to maybe share some experiences on this issue. So I think that is one point, which is we need to discuss food security also in the future and a potential food crisis. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make that point as well.
Thank you. And let me bring in Nolan, because what would you say, or can you give me an example of where you really feel that there are challenges for indigenous food production right now when we talk about the threats that exist?
Sure, thank you. I'll speak to the realities of my region. in my region, seals are a large part of our diet. In fact, I'm wearing seals on my ears right now. They're a huge part of our self-sufficiency, and now with the wage economy being a significant competitor to the traditional economy, access to the traditional economy is significantly lessened. We must acknowledge that to get access to the traditional economy, you need capital to begin with. And so I think that's where we should start.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And certainly there are certain capital and funding solutions, it seems, on hand. We've got a question that's come in from Rita Stobbs. So you're mentioning that aquaculture, Minister, is a critical solution to protein security as well. But Norway has world-leading expertise, but innovation projects are being put on hold. What can governments do to try and accelerate such innovation projects?
No, I'm cold when it comes to that, because we're in a kind of limbo because of a new tax that we, in September, October, went public with. But I'm sure when we in the spring go to the Parliament and this is the decision is taken, investments will flow. Will accelerate again. Yeah, and we see it already in some terms. And I have said like this: I understand that this was hard news for some of the investors, but I'm sure that this is an industry that will grow in Norway, and I'm working every day to make new possibilities. We're working with aquaculture offshore. We are working on other concepts. A lot of politics will make new possibilities for an industry that is very important to Norwegian economy and to the coastline, to all the locals around the coast. So this will grow, I'm sure.
Well, it's good to hear. And I just finally, because I know Taylor was talking about what keeps him up at night, whether he's optimistic. And I'd really like to get that snapshot from you, Taylor. When it comes to funding, because it seems that capital, as Nolan's pointing out, and funding solutions are really crucial. Are you optimistic, or does this issue keep you up at night?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think you put it well earlier. It is a oil tanker trying to turn in many of these systems, but it is turning. And we're seeing additional capital come in that's taking a full spectrum approach from grant making, philanthropy, all the way to real return. And I'm very excited, I think, by what I see as globally people recognizing you have to take a systems approach. You have to engage with indigenous populations. And that's not just talking. That's giving them a percentage of equity. That's bringing them in. It's saying, you take the lead on this. We can provide the capital to be really catalytic. All of those things, when I kind of look around the room, I think I'm very optimistic. And there was a point yesterday about utilizing human talent. And I think what keeps me up at night more than anything else is, are we doing enough to utilize the talent that's out there? And so, thanks.
The challenge is there. So let's try and meet it. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate all of your comments. And thank you very much, Minister. Thanks for your time. So if you could all move off that way, because we have the next panel discussion. Yes, please. Just about to come on. So thank you very much. So yes, we're going to move on a little bit in this discussion now to multiple uses of the ocean and the challenges faced when implementing fishing, renewable energy and aquaculture initiatives from very competing industries. So just how can they coexist, and really who has the priority and who will regulate this? Well, to set the scene, let's hear from the perspective from the Centre for the Ocean and the Arctic. I think we might have to run that video again because there's not much sound. Should we go from the beginning, if we can? Do you know what I'll do? I'm going to invite my next panel up on stage, if that's all right, while the video gets sorted. So please do give a warm welcome to Professor Nils Gunnar Svamsgaard, who's the CEO of the Institute of Marine Research in Norway. Sam Tan from Singapore. Hello. Nice. Welcome. Please do take a seat. Lovely to meet you. Hi, Sam.
Hi.
Sam Tanners from Singapore, Special Envoy for the Arctic. Thank you very much. Dr. Alan Haney, General Secretary for the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. Hi there. Lovely to have you on the panel. Kim Gabrielli, CEO of the UN Global Compact Norway. Hi, Kim. Lovely to meet you. And also Victoria Spaskotska, who's a PhD candidate studying the effects of pollutants on the marine species we eat. What a round of applause from Victoria. Welcome. Thank you very much. Now, let's going to just roll that video again. And this is a view, really, for the Centre for the Ocean and the Arctic.
Human needs for food, energy, transportation, recreation, and other services from the ocean are increasing rapidly. As a result, the ocean economy is growing at an unprecedented rate. Existing ocean industries are expanding, and with innovation and technology, new ones are appearing. Space is becoming a limited resource. Thus, we need a sustainable concept where socio-economic development can occur without environmental degradation or inequity. To achieve a sustainable use of the ocean space, we need to strengthen coexistence and foster win-win solutions. So, is coexistence an attractive solution or an illusion? Will there be winners and losers in the race for space? If so, which ocean industries are in the best position to be prioritized? Will we be able to strike the balance between production and conservation? Is it possible to combat the nature and climate crisis and at the same time support a sustainable ocean economy? The questions are many, and our panel will shed light on these issues. Enjoy.
So lots of questions posed there, and we're going to try and answer most of them during this panel as we delve into the topics. And first of all, Niels, I'd just like to start with you. Look at this illusion, is this an illusion, this coexistence? I mean, ultimately, what does food on the move mean to you? There's a lot of research you've undertaken just showing the vast stresses and competing forces on that.
For me, food on the move is fish on the move. At IMR, we have been monitoring the Norwegian seas for almost 120 years. And now, in our measurements now, we see that the climate change is driving a migration in the ocean of species northward. That's the big picture. We also see that the ecosystems tied to the sea ice is also struggling because the sea ice is diminishing. And who will be the winners in such a system is difficult to go in and very detailed to go in and say now, but this is a development that we should really worry about. Now, this is also only one anthropogenic or human stressor that affects the ocean life or marine ecosystem. At IMR, we are now trying to develop a system where we figure out the total stress from human-induced activities based on something like 18 activities or industries. And this, we hope, will be a tool where we can go in and give advice for what this kind of sustainable use for the ocean when we see the picture, when we see the total picture here. So there will be, as has been said earlier, there is a demand for more resources from the ocean. More industries are coming out to the ocean. There will be area conflicts. So we need the knowledge-based tools to give the advice and try to set this up in a sustainable way.
So you say that we need the knowledge-based tools. Alan Haney, from your point of view, from the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, I mean, what should be the priority then?
So one of the things
and what research, what kind of knowledge base and scientific knowledge do you need to work that out?
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the things that we see is as our questions become more complicated and the environment becomes more dynamic, that we need more people in the process. And I think we all experience this here. You saw in the last session the incredible diversity of people contributing to the conversation. So in ICES, one thing we're doing is bringing in social science a lot into the process so that we're able to make these trade-offs across different ecological, social, and economic dimensions, which we're all struggling with about how to make those decisions. And we're creating integrated ecosystem assessment groups. We have a new group that's focused on the Central Arctic, one that's in the Barents Sea, one over in the Chukchi Sea and Northern Bering Sea. So bringing people together across disciplines, and then also bringing in stakeholders in a way from local and traditional knowledge to all of the participants and users of resources. We're able to take the scientists when they talk to the people who are using the information that they provide and the people who use the resources. When we do work together to understand the environment and the way that we use it, that really lets us use our resources much more efficiently. And the need to do that when we have this type of dramatic change and these incredible challenges that we face is greater than ever, and the advantages of investing in science to understand these problems are as great as they've ever been.
And just how important, Kim, would you say it is from an international perspective that you have this kind of power bank of scientific knowledge that is accumulated and can be drawn on to ensure that fisheries and aquaculture development really do attain the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
If this is a big picture discussion, I would like to take one step back, if I may.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about sustainable business all the time, right? But what is really sustainable business? And to simplify, we could put it into two. So first, of course, we need to do no harm. I mean, take the negative footprint of business. On the other side, we need to create, seize all the opportunities that the Sustainable Development Goals are giving us in the blue economy, new jobs, new opportunities that we heard about. And if you do use the aquaculture as an example of, to exemplify these two forms of sustainability, if you may, the Norwegian context is interesting as one of the largest aquaculture nations in the world, right? We are importing a lot of protein for animal food. 70% of all the import is going to the aquaculture sector. Obviously, if you don't have the information about where that comes from, the traceability, etc., scientific background, and also information from the companies, we don't know if that is soy from the Amazonas or where it comes from. On the other side, we have all the opportunities, all the need for food. We are talking about blue food here as the most natural thing in the world. 2 weeks ago, I was in Davos in a food discussion, and nobody talked about blue food as food, even though it only constitutes less than 5% of all the food in the world. So the potential is enormous. And still, the whole discussion was about land-based food. So here we have, both sides, both the shadow and the sunny side of sustainability, I think.
Mm-hmm. Let me move on to, and you're talking about sustainable production and this real need for food security as well. Clearly that was hot topic in Davos. I was there, I know it was one of them. Let me bring in Sam Tan now from Singapore to get your perspective, because obviously food security is vital in Singapore, limited land mass. What are you doing to try and improve food security? Tell us a little bit more about your 30 by 30 project.
Thank you. Singapore, as we know, is a very small country. We only have 700 square kilometers. And we have 5.7 million people living on this very tiny island. And in addition, we have 17, 18 million tourists visiting Singapore. So if we were to average it out, on the average, there are about 7 million people roaming around on 700 square kilometers at any one time. And therefore, we do not have land for agriculture and aquaculture. And therefore, we have to import food from overseas. As it is now, more than 90% of our food actually is imported from overseas. And diversifications of food sources, therefore, becomes a very critical strategy for us. And we are currently importing food from more than 170 countries in the world. Having said that, we still don't feel that we can really achieve food security. So diversification of food sources is plan A. We need to have plan B. So our plan B is to set a target to produce 30% of the food locally in Singapore. We had to somehow find some land and use technology to do that. So the aim is we want to produce 30% of the food locally in Singapore by the year 2030. So from now to 2030, it's only left with 7 years. So we are doubling down on this. So that will be our plan B. And even that, we don't feel safe because plan B sometimes can fail. So we go into plan C. And that is to go into technologies to produce protein and use protein to create alternative meat sources and products. So in 2020, Singapore actually, if I remember it correctly, I think Singapore was the first country in the world to approve the sales of alternative meats for consumption by the people after years of extensive studies. In 2022, just a few months ago, the government of Singapore further approved the commercial sale of this protein called Solein, which is a product by a Finnish company called Solar Foods. And it is used to produce alternative meat and bread, plant-based.
So that could be part of the solution for the future. And let me bring in Nils again. I mean, do you think this is a key part, this different forms of protein, to ensure that there is this balance struck between production and conservation? It's clear that we need to produce more given the problem, or differently. So how do you marry the two?
I would say, I would start with saying that I can always point at some, what should I say, research priorities or what we need to know and so on, but I think also that we need to be quite practical about it and also try to use what we know, the knowledge we already have today about these things. A very different example, in Norway, for instance, we are now, the government, as was said there in the last section, is launching a program for offshore wind. Setting out these turbines into the ocean will definitely affect the marine ecosystems. There will be pros and cons, of course. But on the other hand, this is a technology that inhibit greenhouse gas emissions. So in that sense, it will slow down climate change, of course. So then you in a way stand here between should we do this? It has pros and cons, but it also helps us. So I think we need to look at the combinations here and use what we know. And for instance, these offshore wind parks, they can be combined with growing, for instance, low trophic food, mussels, kelp, and so on. And maybe also that we can make this production CO2 consuming, so we extract CO2 from it.
So all very, vital projects, but ultimately, Alan, who decides? Once you have all these data, you might have gathered it all. Who decides what should take priority? Because on the face of it, everything seems so important.
Yeah, great question. I mean, at ICES, we have these big science networks that then provide quality assured advice, but we don't get to decide how that advice is used. And I think that's one of the challenges that we talked about this in the last session of just different people weigh these choices differently. And we're seeing how business, scientists, and governance are working together to find these solutions. And I think something that's this frustration when we're all here is we see all these incredible things and solutions and ways of approaching these problems, and then we're not solving all the problems we want to solve. And I think that's something that we need to keep building the connections between scientists and businesses and decision makers, and have these repeated dialogues where we really understand what the information is, the types of scientific information and types of policies that are interesting to decision makers, so that they can make the decisions that balance the needs and objectives that they have.
There's a question that's come in just showing the real kind of conflict that you're talking about from Heidi Silvestre. She says there's no food security in the Arctic Ocean beyond 2 degrees. In this context, how can we accept that Norway is opening new oil and gas leases on the Barents Shelf? I don't know whether, Kim, you could perhaps respond to that from the UN Global Compact. I mean, clearly, the United Nations, these issues are being debated all the time. This toss-up between energy security, food security, and also, global warming as well. These are very difficult dilemmas to approach, aren't they? And how do you go about doing that?
If I could answer that question, I guess you should all listen very carefully. Obviously, we are in the midst of the combination of energy security and pollution at the same time. And I don't have an answer to that question. I mean, I don't have the 1 million answer. But of course, what we are seeing is that there is a need for more regulations, and there is a need for trustworthy transition plans. That goes for the country of Norway, that goes for the companies as well, right? And we are seeing, let's say, a wave of regulations coming from the EU, right? And also from Norwegian politicians, and that is good. But I think actually the business is asking for a regulation tsunami, because we really need to define what is sustainable and what is not, what helps us meet the goals we need. And this is exactly the same when it goes for the Norwegian oil production. Is it a good idea to have oil production in the global, in the Barents Sea? But that is just the first question. We are now discussing oil, but how many of you have thought about the mining coming? Then we can start talking about local ownership and indigenous discussion. We can talk about aerial spatial planning. And yes, I'm sure we can do mining and tourism at the same time, but that doesn't make it necessarily so popular amongst the local population, right? So I think there is a big discussion here on, on defining what are we actually willing to do to keep our energy security, and what are we willing to do combination of business activities, and how do we ensure local ownership? And perhaps the last thing, there's much more resistance against land wind in Norway than in Denmark. That's interesting to look into. Why is that? One theory could be that 75% of all land mills in Denmark are owned by private people, and half of that of cooperatives. So it's actually individual people going together, like farming, owning the land mills. Is that the reason why there is less, opposition to that? I don't know, but I don't know why Norway hasn't, for example, created a local ownership to land mills like they have in Denmark.
I don't know either. Does anybody know? Maybe somebody can send it through to me on the tablet and we shall tell you all. But I think this is a great opportunity now to bring in Victoria Szapocka, who's a PhD student at UIB. We're talking about the impact of oil exploration. We're talking about the need for scientific experts like yourself. Now, you started off carrying out research into how oil spills affect marine species we eat, and you're now carrying out research into ocean acidification and what causes it. I mean, what propelled you, Victoria, what grabbed your attention in terms of ocean acidification, and just what is the subject of your research?
Thank you. So I'm a foodie, and I grew up on the coast eating fish, and together with my fellow fish lovers, I am concerned about the fish welfare. And when we think about ocean acidification, we often think about the warmer waters of Australia and the coral reefs dying over there. But the reality is that the colder waters of the Arctic are actually capable of dissolving more carbon dioxide than the warmer waters in Australia, putting the Arctic more at risk. And when we get this increased acidification of the waters, the food chain breaks apart, and especially the essential parts of the food chain of the fishes that we eat, salmon, cod, haddock, it gets affected. And currently, I am developing a pH sensor, which can be used to observe these kind of climate changes that are happening. And these observations and the data can be used to make informed decision on how we should handle the situation. And I'm here because I'm a young scientist, and I wanted to highlight the importance of the current and future research and the importance of collaboration, both nationally in Norway and internationally.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And Alan Haney, you know, it's research like Victoria's that really feeds through to that huge bank of expertise that you're able then to work out the priorities, really, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. I mean, we have an early career scientist strategic initiative where we're really trying to reach out in all sorts of ways to connect young scientists in all the things that we do. And I'm thrilled, you know, that you're here talking with us, and I think that you know, it's just amazing. You know, the new challenges we face. I think, you know, young people have lived their lives in an era of climate change and, you know, and technological transformation. And I think, you know, just constantly, you know, I learn all the time from those types of connections. And I think it is we are diversifying the way that we're including all sorts of different voices in the system. But I think one thing that you know, your discussion really, you know, points to is how we're recognizing these new changes, but we really have to react at an appropriate scale. Of like, we've got the tools, we've got the people, we've got, you know, from you know, business to science to management institutions. We really can confront this challenge, but we need to recognize the haste that we face and address it at the appropriate scale. And the future is not going to be like the past, and we're going to have to quickly adapt what we do to effectively address these challenges at the appropriate scale.
And how do you address the challenges at the appropriate scale? Nils, can I bring you in here? I mean, you know, what have you been looking at to try and upscale? And you mentioned these big 18 stresses. So how do you need to galvanize really action?
I think the system I was telling about, it's a very complex system and a model behind it. So and it's difficult in a way to explain simply. But on the other hand, when we are taking to address these things properly with practical measures in society, I think science has a very big responsibility to communicate the knowledge base to the policymakers and decision takers. That is so that we can, in a way, convey it so that they see the practical measures they can take to, in a way, carry it through. If I can take a very kind of extreme example, if you look at the IPCC report, for instance, it's a massive amount of knowledge that has been piled up in this. But still, it hasn't, in a way, worked. We don't see that the greenhouse gas emissions go down. So we really need to ask ourselves, have we conveyed this in a manner that the politicians and decision makers can use it to take practical measures within their frames of opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
So that interface between science and politicians and decision makers and industry also, I think that's an area we really need to take more seriously.
Well, I'm very pleased to say in the big picture session tomorrow, the last one of the event, that's exactly what we're going to be trying to address, just how do we do that. But, you know, right now, with all of your research and the mechanisms that you can use, are there specific areas that you think should be prioritised right now? What's thrown up?
I think that we should... the priority, I think, from a Norwegian point of view, we have a quite successful aquaculture industry. As it was said there, it's not circular. That's one thing we really need to prioritize, I think, to get the salmon industry circular. Also, I think Norway needs to diversify the aquaculture so that we go harder into low trophic kelp, mussels, and these things, that we explore that at a faster pace than we do today.
Okay, thank you. Let me just bring in Kim.
Yeah, I think what you talk to the multi-stakeholder approach, you're bringing together, that's what the UN, of course, that we are representing are trying to do. But at the same time, we have a member base of 18,000 companies, right? So we have put them together, and those that have been engaged in the ocean, the academic sector as well, and created the Sustainable Business Ocean Principles. And I mean, this is a start. We're trying to say what is a sustainable ocean. Obviously, aquaculture and the area of food is one of the 5 tracks of that and directions. And it has guided, for example, the Norwegian Oil Fund, which is the largest state-owned, sovereign fund in the world, right? To use that in their expectation documents. So it's a start. We need to do more of this, and we need to, obviously implement all the principles that are out there. But I think this is crucial that we're going to do that. So yet another recommendation for your session tomorrow.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. And interesting, Alan was talking about that that need to make sure that information is shared and input is taken from all generations and certainly from younger scientists, but also what input can you have from other geographical regions outside of the Arctic. And I'd quite like to get your view, Sam, on what Victoria was saying about the oceans and about the warmer oceans and the threats that can pose to certain species, particularly in the Arctic. What can you share? Because, of course, coming from Singapore, you've already have warmer aquaculture climate. So what are you doing that could help this region, for example?
Well, the water conditions in tropical waters and Arctic waters, obviously, are quite different. So I'm not exactly sure how we can actually transplant what we are doing in Singapore in the tropical waters and then apply it into the colder Arctic waters. But nevertheless, I think it is still useful just for me to share some of the things that Singapore is doing in terms of facilitating aquaculture farming. Like for example, our scientists and companies have actually jointly developed a system called Real-Time Water Quality Monitoring System. And we deployed this system, the devices and all that, into our fish farms. And this system will monitor the water temperature and also monitor the level of pathogens, viruses, and bacteria. The purpose is quite simple, because when the water gets warmer than usual, then you will expect higher level of algae bloom. And when you have a lot of algae in the water, they will suck up the oxygen, and they will leave the fish suffocate and die, and that will affect the the fish stock. So this system will pick up anomalies in terms of the algae bloom, in terms of pathogen levels and all that, and it will automatically send a signal, a warning signal, to the farmer, whoever is operating the systems in the office. It will send a message to alert, the person in charge that there's something going wrong in the water, and this person will then investigate what's happening, and then will alert the government agencies to come in. If they see there's unusually high level of pathogens in the water, that obviously concerns the public health, food hygiene and all that, then the government agencies will get involved to investigate and then to put in place measures to mitigate and reduce the level of dangers. So I think the logic, the principles, the methodologies, and also the technologies can be applied, adapted, and modified according to the Arctic conditions. So this is something that I think we can provide more opportunities for discourse and discussion so that we can collectively find something useful for the Arctic waters. And on the other hand, all of us know that Arctic is melting. So the cold water will come down, one day will reach the shore of Singapore. I think when that happens, it will be a time for us to learn from our Arctic friends, the Nordic friends, on how to deal with cold waters in a hot climate.
areas.
It's
like,
interesting you
Singapore.
talked there about some about new technologies, and I think some of the technologies using like Internet of Things technology. Niels, to what extent do you think the solutions are coming already thick and fast in the technological realm, and in many ways perhaps they're not being exploited enough? And where do you find the most kind of exciting tech at the moment, particularly perhaps CO2 extraction, for example?
Maybe not directly in CO2 extraction, but from our perspective, as I said in the beginning, we monitor the oceans, and in doing so, we use a lot of ships, which of course use a lot of CO2. And we are now in the middle of the process where we see how we can use autonomous vehicles, robotics, and maybe use these to get the same insight as we do with the traditional methods. And at least that will be a contribution.
Okay, and Kim, what's your take on that? Are you excited about the technological possibilities that could help some solve these solutions? But how can they be propelled?
I think there are so many possibilities now. It's not really about, it's more about getting it into a system. I think we have so much technology, of course. If you take carbon storage, for example, it's not mature enough yet. So it will need the incentives. It will need, it's already in place in some areas. So it will need both incentives, regulations, and all of that. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to push for clear targets and credible transition plans. So, for example, together with WWF, we have the science-based targets for climate. That is now the Norwegian government just put forward as a requirement for state-owned companies. And that is a credible transition plan where you have to go into all the data, have a look. Of course, it's not a perfect system, as none of these are, but you go into your whole business and you're looking at what is the materiality, what is the biggest challenges, and what should you do first in order to get to net zero. And I think that will propel the technological shift as well. So I think we need to do it both from developing technology, but also making sure that the large multinationals and their value chains, with Hydro, for example, having 25,000 suppliers. Can you imagine if they start propelling their shift to a more green future? So I think it comes down to that again, and luckily that is part of the new EU regulation coming up on due diligence and transparency. So I think here we're seeing an example where the business, UN, and policy are playing together. So I'm quite hopeful that we will get there with help of technology as well.
Okay, well, thank you. We have a question that's come through from Lasse Pedersen. Salmon is expensive and gives little profit. What about focusing on species that are affordable to most of the inhabitants on Earth, also in the high north? I don't know whether, Niels, you can is that something that you'd be interested in?
I can agree.
Yeah, you can agree.
I can agree definitely with that, and it's not only good for a consumer and equality perspective, but also from a marine ecosystem point of view as well. So yeah. I think it's a very valid question.
Yeah, and talking about the human perspective, Alan, it's interesting to what extent you think humans need to be really looked at as part of the whole ecosystem. Do you think sometimes often that's almost like the missing link?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is something that a long time ago we used to think of people. We want to keep people away from the science and the ecosystem and have this pure science. But of course, the world we live in, people are everywhere, right? And the ocean as we know it is a product of all the things that we've done in it. And I think this is something that happily we really have collectively recognized this in marine science. And you just look at the way that the field has changed during my career, where I initially would say we ought to think about more social science in these questions, and some of the biologists would laugh at me or say, stay away. And now I hear, decades later, the biologists say the same things that I would say about exactly what you asked of, okay, this is an integrated system. We have to think about people and the benefits. And I think, building on what Kim said, about the technological processes here, clearly, the way that we have these technologies and people are in the, scientists, business folks, managers, we're all people. And the way the technology is evolving, it's happening in the business context and in the context of governance. And when we think about marine wind, offshore wind energy, in the early 80s, the United States started subsidizing lots of wind production. This technology slowly got cheaper. And we're really fortunate that at this point, that long-term process has led to now being quite affordable. So we have the opportunity to have a green transition that wind is a big part of.
So would you generally say you're pretty optimistic?
Yeah, as an economist, a practitioner of the dismal science, it's hard to say you're optimistic, but I'm very optimistic, because I see people like Victoria and all of the incredible great ideas here, and the fact that we're having these conversations makes me optimistic. But we need to talk more and talk faster.
Okay, thank you. Victoria, would you say that you are as well, being on this panel and the experience, and what would you say your view of the future is?
Yeah, like you said earlier, I'm the part of the generation that grew up scared of the climate change. And after participating in Arctic Frontiers Emerging Leaders Program the last week, I became more optimistic about the future, definitely. And this program, it burst my bubble a little bit, and it broadened my horizons. And I've met young people, young researchers, which are really engaged and optimistic as well. They are hopeful, and they care. And these people that I met, they're open for cooperation. They're going to be the future leaders of the Arctic, of the world. And based on that, I'm really optimistic, because I believe that we can change the world, hopefully.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Victoria. It's been fantastic having you on the panel. I really appreciate it. I'm just very quickly, just before we end, going to get a quick snapshot from all of you. Would you say you're optimistic, or what keeps you up at night?
I'm absolutely optimistic. I think we have good opportunities. But let me add one thing I didn't say. I think we need a brand campaign for blue food, because I think we don't understand how little focus there is on blue food outside of this region and perhaps Eastern Asia. So guys, it's great with the seaweed, but if nobody eats it, nobody wants it, we actually need to do something about it. So let me leave you with that instead of saying that I'm hopeful about the future, because that I hope we all are at a certain extent.
Thank you very much. Niels, what's your big takeaway, would you say, from this?
What keeps me up awake during night is the climate problem and reducing the greenhouse emissions. I'm kind of optimistic because we have the insight. The problem is to take this insight out into practical action faster than we have done so far. Mm-hmm. And having seen the students here at the Arctic Frontiers, I'm quite optimistic about that we will make it.
Thank you, Niels. And Sam Tan, just to end.
Well, I have retired from politics and government, so actually I sleep very well these days. But then, in my previous incarnation as a politician, so what kept me and my colleagues in the government while awake at night actually are two things. One is the food supplies, how to feed our people with sufficient food supplies uninterrupted. Two is how to protect our country with adequate and robust security measures. And in the government of Singapore, we always believe that what you cannot protect is not yours. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine has proven this to be true. So these are the things that now I leave to my colleagues in the government to stay awake all night, so that the rest of the Singaporeans can sleep soundly.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you to you all for being on the panel, for all of your great insights and sense of humour as well. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. You can go off that way. Thank you. So, Andreas, so much food for thought there, certainly, and I know that's going to be what you'll be taking up to go on Break TV. We've got quite a fast turnaround, haven't we?
Yeah, we do. I think there were some important reminders for us here in the room. We heard we need to talk more and we need to talk faster. I don't know if we need to talk faster per se, but I think it's important that we also need to talk to a different audience outside the Arctic, which was a nice reminder here that we are in the Arctic, we know what the challenges are. we're working on the solutions here in the room outside in Break TV, but maybe a lot of people outside the region don't know about the challenges here and what we can provide to global problems, or what kind of solution we could provide to the global world. So I think that was a very strong reminder of looking outside the Arctic. But yeah, I have to run outside to Break TV soon.
Thank you very much. It's given me the chance to give me the green light just to eat a lot more fish and chips, which I absolutely love. So there we are.
Before I run, maybe just two things. We talked about food production and salmon here in Norway, but at 5:30 we'll have an event on Northern Norway on the Plate where we'll hear about more possibilities beyond salmon. And you have heard the Minister of Fisheries, but at 5:30 you will see him cook something which we can try to eat. So I hope you join me here in this room at 5:30. Right after 5:30, and at Northern Norway on the Plate event, we have our big reception, not here, but at the Radisson, which is outside to the left, few minutes walk. Bring your coat, bring your jacket, we'll start outside. If you're too cold, you can go inside, but we have some nice program outside, so bring your coat. 7:30 we start, and bring your badge, which I don't have with me, so we can register and you can actually go inside. But anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you very
See you
much.
later.
And please do come back to the hall in about 25 minutes' time, because we have the last big picture session of the day, moving to and from the north, and the Prime Minister will be here. So please don't miss that. Thank you.
My vision for the Arctic is a community where growth, science and development is within nature's limits. Sustainable development and research will help protect the Arctic for those who live there, for future generations and visitors.
I envision the Arctic as a region where the new norm is involving youth in the green transition. A region welcoming bold and innovative ideas and where youth are involved on matters affecting them. I foresee a bright future for the Arctic and its leaders of tomorrow.
My vision for the Arctic is that it will once again be an area of close international collaboration. Science can provide a neutral space for collaboration, and this is indeed necessary to further our understanding of the global shared challenge of climate change and indeed how to tackle it.
Okay, yeah.
Take your mic then when you talk. With you. We'll start whenever we...
Camera when we
we talk like this. Oh. And here we are again. Welcome back to Break TV, number 2, after the big picture session, number 2. I made it out here. It's not that far, but I have to run a bit, and I get double mic'd, so it takes a few minutes. Welcome back. I have two new guests. To my right, to your left, Merete Christiansen, who is the Managing Director of Aquaplaniva. We'll hear more about Aquaplaniva. And to the left, Rachel Callender, who is the founder of Arctic Encounters, and we'll hear more about Arctic Encounters. I will start with you, Merete. We heard a lot about challenges, technology, investment possibilities. From your perspective as Aquaplaniva Managing Director and your business background you have as well in the industry, in the food production industry, how can we bring the complexity to a table that we can actually move forward? You know what I mean? That like we have the problems, we know what the problems are, we think ahead what the future problems could be. There is money on the table, we have private businesses being interested, but how can you as a company invested in research actually help bring knowledge to the table and move forward? Let's put it that way.
Thank you for the question, because that is actually what we are trying to do every day. I mean, to bring value, to use the competences, to use the research to the businesses. So we give advice based on what we know. We give advice to the industries, whether it comes to how to improve their production of different kinds of species in fish or algae, whatever, and also how to reduce the issues related to the environment. So how can the businesses change? How can they adapt to have a better production? So I think it's part about joining people in the same table and actually doing business together as well.
So you have a background in the business, food production system itself, and now you're in a research system. Like, what is the challenge in bringing these two stakeholders into one room, speaking the same language, and then actually producing something that is of profit to all of us?
Yeah, I think that of course the scientists, they really have an urge to bring forward everything they know, and scientists always say, well, we don't know enough. So that's a challenge from our side. But then on the business side, they always have an urge to move on quicker than the knowledge. So I think it's about keeping the same pace in a way, that we actually as researchers, scientists, manage to also look at what are the needs for the industries, because they need help to develop in a more sustainable way. And I think all kinds of industries today, they need to develop further. Can I just say one issue that was that I heard from the panels, because it's about not overusing the resources. I mean, in Norway we have a lot of resources, but it's about using them in a good way and not overusing. So I think that's what Vicky from the WWF said about reducing, reusing and recycling. I think that's really important that we also bring that into the industries.
And that brings me to the other side of the Arctic Ocean, to Alaska. Rachel, I mean, you've been to Tromsø many times, you know the discussions going on, you have your conference, Arctic Encounters, which is similar to Arctic Frontiers, bringing stakeholders together. Do you discuss the same topics than the Norwegians do, than the Norwegian Arctic is discussing? Or is there a different kind of discussion going on when it comes to food production, circular economy, et cetera, investments?
Yeah, great question. I would say it's slightly different. Okay. This is my 4th time to Tromsø. I love it here, but I remember how striking it was to me the first time I came to hear how much the discussion on aquaculture here is about fish farms, which we do not have where I'm from. I was born and raised in a commercial fishing family, in a fishing town that is a very small population, fishes a massive amount of seafood, massive volume. We're very proud of that. We don't have fish farms, and in fact, they're like quite frowned upon where I come from. So to scale and in terms of the relationship with the resource is completely different.
Do you try to bring these two sides together then in Arctic Encounters, for example? Like you said, okay, the Norwegians have that kind of approach. We do it differently here, but what can we actually learn? Can we share best practices, or is there actually that what can we learn from intra-Arctic cooperation, not only on the research side, but maybe also on the business side?
Yeah, no, I think one area where we have a lot to learn from Norway, and I'm eager to try to do that, maybe we can collaborate on this together in the coming weeks, is like monitoring and research. I know that Norway has agreements in place with fishing boats and other vessels that are constantly out in the fjords and in all areas here, where there's a data collection process, like an agreement in place. We have that in a similar sense, but I think the tech capability is lesser than. The reason why I think that's a really exciting opportunity for a place like Alaska is, as you know, the United States is massive. Alaska, in fact, could be placed over the whole of Europe. And Alaska, out of the U.S. Coastline, we have something like just over 70% of U.S. coastline. This is a massive amount of water and a massive amount of resources and species to monitor to make effective science-based management decisions. And so some of the things that we're seeing that are quite scary, quite alarming in our oceans, I think there is much that we could learn from our Norwegian friends to do better in the future.
What, these conferences, these sessions, there's always something that sticks with you, and you said, okay, that I can move forward with that thought, And for me, again, I mentioned it inside, it was really like, we know about the Arctic, and we think the world knows about the Arctic and challenges and the solutions we might have to problems, but apparently it's not the case when it comes into blue food, So what can we do as Arctic researchers, as Arctic stakeholders, to bring that knowledge into the world, into Singapore or to other areas?
Yeah. I think a good start is actually starting to share with each other. Because as you say about like fisheries, and we have Nils Gunnar Kvamstø, he mentioned food on the move is actually fish on the move. So I think we will all see that the fish is moving north in your areas and in our areas. And then I think it's about using remote sensing, using new technologies to learn and to build like this science basis together. And I think when we collaborate, we should invite, like you have today, Singapore is in the panel. We should invite the others also to bring in their knowledge. So I think, but it's really difficult because we are sort of on the top of the world, and we're not that many people in our countries.
I think that's something that line of thought. But please go ahead.
I was going to say though, what was really interesting is we talked about, of course, fish on the move moving north. But the gentleman from Singapore said he's already thinking ahead to with ice cap melting and glaciers, etc. Cold water rushing south to Singapore, of all places. That's something, honestly, I would not given much thought to, and now I'm curious. I wish I could go pull him aside and talk to him about that. We'll have to go find him.
I have a final question, because I think we soon have to end, but one of the gentlemen said the baseline of discussions will change in 5-10 years from now. So from that food perspective, from the collaboration perspective, what will we discuss about in 5 years from now? Arctic 2030.
Yeah, I hope we will discuss much more about the green production in the sea. I mean, alga, low trophic, different kinds of things where we use the sea in a much better way. And we are now starting to talk about nature inclusive design. So someone mentioned like the wind farms, that we can actually use the other production units to produce healthy food or feed for other animals or energy. So I really hope that next time we will talk much more about the other types of production we are doing in the sea, nature inclusive.
Will we already discuss that at Arctic Encounter at the end of March?
Yes. I was prepared to answer your question about 5 years from now, which is going to sound very idealistic. But I'm deeply concerned about the crash in crab stocks that we are seeing in Alaska. And this has a massive impact across our state, but especially to like Western indigenous communities and port communities. We have to figure out a way how to solve for that collapse and how to rebuild with those stocks. And I hope that in 5 years, if I'm back here and you ask me the same question, I say, we found the solution, we're rebuilding.
So the solution is actually to talk more with each other and also beyond. Merete, thank you very much. Rachel, thank you very much. And we see each other later. Thank you very much.
My vision for the Arctic is to help supply the raw materials that we need for a low-carbon future, but in an environmentally and socially responsible way, which not only benefits the local communities, but it actually drives prosperity in the long term. The Arctic has the opportunity to really lead the way in defining how mining can be done responsibly.
I think there is future opportunities in the Arctic in sharing experiences in resource management and technology, as a strategy towards a more sustainable and self-sufficient society.
My vision for the future opportunities in the Arctic is that these opportunities are treated with responsibility. A responsibility to ensure not only economic growth, but also a responsibility to make decisions and choices that are sustainable for nature, for the future climate, and for all parts of society, and not only for a few.
My vision for the Arctic is one where the well-being of the local people and environment aren't treated as secondary to economic and resource extraction from the region. Without this, we can never build a sustainable Arctic future.
My vision is that the world comes to better understand the full global impact of activities in the Arctic, and that this results in nations working together to preserve interests and increase sustainability while using a globally understood and agreed upon risk-gain analysis when making decisions that could impact the future of this critical region.
My vision for the Arctic is one that builds on the unique value of building bridges and connections to foster a society that is robust, inclusive, and open to minority and indigenous voices.
I envision the Arctic to be a future green energy hub and competence area that can attract youth from all over the world. I also see the Arctic as one of the most interesting places to live and work in, both now and in the future.
I think the future opportunities in the Arctic will be found in sustainable work and value creation. We must develop low emissions solutions and make use of technological innovation to foster green growth that will benefit both the people and the climate of the Arctic.
Future opportunities in the Arctic are advancing research in changing climate and implementing clean energy in cold and remote regions. My vision for the future in the Arctic is prioritizing youth leadership and community energy production.
Out here, in the North Sea, the first drops of Norwegian oil were discovered in 1969. 3 years later, in 1972, Equinor was established. It all started with a small office in Stavanger on Norway's southwest coast. Today, we have more than 20,000 employees, spanning countries, continents, and oceans. We're an international energy company with Norwegian roots. And regardless of where we operate, the purpose is the same: to turn natural resources into energy for people and progress for society. Now we are facing the biggest challenge of our lifetime: climate change. The world needs energy. Reliable, affordable energy with lower and lower emissions over time. The energy industry is part of the problem, but also part of the solution. And we will do our part. We're optimizing our portfolio and reducing emissions in our oil and gas production. We're building a large renewables business, and we're developing low-carbon solutions like hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. In Equinor, we're building the future on the foundation of everything we've learned over the past 50 years. It's about major offshore projects, often under tough weather conditions. It's about technology and innovation. It's about digitalization. It's about building industries. And it's about people. People with the ambition to make a difference. But we can't do the job alone. The energy transition and achieving a net zero society is too large a task for one company, one industry, or one country. We all have a role to play. And now, more than ever before, success depends on all of us working together.